Okay, so if I understand what you're saying correctly, we're we're using meditation to learn how to understand our brains and maybe manage our brains. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Um, a meditation practice invites us to explore our patterns, whether it's our behavior or how we feel or how we think or just how we react to certain situations. And when we have the level of self-awareness without judgment, when we have curiosity about our own patterns, and we can tap into better emotional regulation. We can change those patterns, which all lead then to a slew of other benefits from meditation to improve sleep, release of depression or anxiety symptoms, lower stress, better confidence, overall, just a courage to accept ourselves as we are in any given moment.
Yeah. And I think maybe the resistance I've had sometimes to meditation is it's hard to understand how sitting quietly and kind of allowing your thoughts can do all of that. Because I hear you and I see what you mean, but maybe that's what sometimes people wonder. How does it do all that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the actual mechanism of what happens in the brain, I can't get into too much detail, but there's a lot of evidence, and there have been a myriad of studies showing that sitting in silence, choosing where we focus our attention, um, can actually rewire our neural pathways. So when we talk about building habits and the changes in the neural path are required to build and create and maintain a habit, whether it's running or journaling or learning a new language or whatever it is, a meditation practice helps with that rewiring so that we start to react and respond differently and we start to make choices with intention in the present moment, as opposed to constantly feeling overwhelmed.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And it is pretty amazing that taking time to do this on a regular basis can have those results. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's
It is, I think it is the single most important tool that we have for our mental health hygiene. Um, and I don't say that lightly as someone who has lived with mental health difficulties like so many other people. I have tried a number of different things. Um, and I'm not going to say meditation is the end all be all because people have their own challenges, their own perspectives, their own circumstances. Work with your medical provider to figure out what works for you. Um, but I know for me and for many other people I've talked to, meditation allows stronger emotional regulation, awareness of what is happening in our mind, and acceptance of that. Like I said, for me, was just life changing.
really fascinating. Really fascinating. And I love it when we learn about something that, it doesn't require special tools, it doesn't require a special place to go, it doesn't require a lot of expense, and it can make a big difference. That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, that is one of my purposes in starting to teach and in doing what I do is to demystify what meditation is. I think a lot of us, I know I did, have this vision in our mind of what a meditator is, right? You're sitting in some uncomfortable cross-legged position. You have to have like the beads and the music and the candles and the cushions and all of these things, or you have to chant or you have to go to a meditation center. You can do any of those things. There's nothing wrong with any of them, but you don't need them. You can
Yeah.
sit in your bed in your pajamas. This is what I do in the mornings. I wake up, brush my teeth, I get back into bed. My morning practice is I sit in my bed for 20 minutes, quiet, my eyes closed. I do have a candle because I like that and that feels good for me. But my cats are usually like running around the bed and cuddling up next to me. Um, so it is something that is incredibly accessible. You can do it anywhere, anytime. I have a friend who meditates on airplanes. You can do it no matter what.
Wow. Okay. So that answered a lot of what I was going to ask and what I'm sure people are thinking, because I know that I've heard also a concern is, well, what if I just fall asleep? I'm just going to fall asleep if I, sit there quietly. Well, I guess you don't have to lie down, right? You don't have to be in a position where it's easy to fall asleep.
Right. No, it's and that is a fair question. If you fall asleep, take a nap. Like I'm a big fan of
Mm,
naps. If you fall asleep, then that means that your body and your mind are tired. So allow yourself the nap again without judgment. That's an okay thing to do. Um, I have found sitting up with your back supported, but your head and neck free. So don't lean your head back on a surface,
mm,
will help to keep you awake. When you drop into, particularly if you're doing a silent meditation, if you drop in really deeply into a really calm state, it can feel like you're about to fall asleep when you just allow yourself to be. Um, and that's a really great place to be because you're allowing your mind to really rest and to not focus on anything but the actual present moment. And then when you come out of it, there are tons of reports, and I have felt this personally, of feeling a lot more energized, a lot more peaceful, a lot more calm. Um, there are different mindfulness techniques if you want to, try. You can do like a walking meditation. You can eat mindfully. There are lots of different ways to do mindfulness that don't involve lying down or being silent. Um, so there are lots of different things to try.
yeah, good point. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to bring up, this word mindfulness. I feel like it's another word where we sort of know what that means and we're not really sure. So would you use that interchangeably with meditation, or is it a little different?
That's a great question. It is a little different. It it's also a little bit semantics, I think. Mindfulness is um, that awareness. We go through life on autopilot so much.
Hmm.
Mindfulness kind of asks us to be present and to be aware. Meditation is one of the ways in which we can practice mindfulness.
Okay.
And you can walk mindfulness, eat mindfully, move mindfully. They have like mindfulness coloring books.
Yep.
Meditation is sitting with our thoughts in mindfulness.
Okay. So mindfulness, could we say, is kind of just sort of stopping and smelling the roses, paying attention to what's going on.
I love that. Yes.
Okay. Good. Good, good, good.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to predict, well, someone's listening to this. What questions are they asking themselves? I think you've given us a really great the trains was fantastic. That's going to help me personally a lot. And you've given us a great overview of the benefit. So what if someone is listening and now saying, okay, you're the 100th person that has told me that I should try meditating. So, okay, how do I start? What do I do if I'm going to try?
So first, I think um, there are a number of different styles of meditation. There are guided meditations, there are moving meditations, there's silent meditation, there's chanting, there's uh, music, um, and on and on and on. There are lots of different styles. So I would recommend expose yourself to different styles of meditation. I know that I struggled a lot with guided meditations. moving meditations I struggle with. What I found a meditative practice that worked for me, it was the silent meditation. So play around with different styles and don't judge yourself if one doesn't feel right or if one doesn't work
Mm,
with another.
yeah.
It's all about finding what works for you. I would also play around with time of day. Morning works really well for a lot of people, but it might be that midday works best for you or
Mm,
nighttime. There isn't any one right way to practice. Um, I also, as I mentioned before, rethinking the image in our minds of what we think of as a meditator. There's no rules about this. You don't need any special tools or techniques. You don't have to repeat a mantra. It's super accessible. You can just sit down and start as you are. There are lots of apps out there that are helpful for guided meditation. Um, Starting with those is good. Um, the other thing is it's just like picking up any other habit. It takes time and commitment
mhm.
and consistency. Um, there will be days, there will be times when a meditation is deeply gratifying and juicy and you come out of it feeling super energized. And then there are going to be times when it's more of a slog, when
Mm,
your brain won't stop wandering, you're easily distracted, the minutes seem to go by super slow. That's just a part of the practice. um, I heard someone say once, commitment doesn't really mean anything until it's hard, right? Like
ooh.
when it's tricky, when it's hard, that's when your commitment is really not called into question, but when you have to actually step up and say, well, I'm committed to this. So even though it's hard, I made a commitment. Um, and reframing the idea that just because something is hard doesn't mean it isn't worth doing and doesn't
Mhm.
mean that the benefits aren't there. So trusting the process a little bit if you stick with it.
Yeah. And so if someone sits down and says, I'm gonna sit silently for however many minutes, and then they get really frustrated or whatever, would you advise just let it go for today, try again tomorrow? Some days are like that. Is there anything else they should do?
Yeah, there's a great technique, particularly for silent meditation, called anchoring. So, using an anchor. A lot of times you'll hear a meditator talk about focusing on the breath. We do that a lot in yoga too. So, focusing on the breath, um, it might be the sound of a bell or chimes. It could be the feeling of your feet on the floor, or focusing on the spot between your eyebrows. All of these things can act as an anchor. So, what that means is when your mind wanders, as it will, because that's what the mind does, you notice it, but then you allow that anchor, you come back to that space, you come back to the breath, you come back to the sound of the chimes, you come back to that feeling that you've identified. Um, However many times you need to,
Mhm.
however often you need to do it, you just keep bringing yourself back to that anchor, and that's the practice. The practice isn't sitting silent for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes or however long it is. The practice is when you notice your mind wandering, you intentionally make the choice to bring it back to that anchor. So so I would, if someone was going to sit silently to get started, pick an anchor, choose to focus on that. Start with 5 minutes, work your way up to however long you want to. Um, and yeah, I'm really intuitive about how long the practice can be. If 5 minutes is what works for you, great. If you want to go for 30 minutes, have at it. It's whatever feels right for your body in that moment.
And that is the next question I was going to ask actually, is what is the right amount of time? And isn't it interesting? We kind of always want to know the right way and the right answer and the rule. And what you're kind of saying is there's no rule. Try it, find something you like.
Yeah, there's no rule because it's so deeply personal for every person and it's different for everybody. So, my personal practice is 20 minutes a day, twice a day. Somebody else, it might be a 5 minute guided meditation as they're getting ready to walk their kids to school. For somebody else, it might be some quiet time as they're getting ready for bed in the evening. So it really is different for everybody. There are you could do like a day-long retreat in silence. You could do an hour-long session. There are loads of different ways of practicing. For a beginner, I would start small. I would start incrementally. Start at 2 minutes if you need to, and then slowly work your way up as you build the capacity to be able to do that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And yeah, there is no right or wrong way. Absolutely.
I think maybe this is the part of meditation that is hard for my brain to grasp onto, and that's just because I'm very analytical. But I'm glad we're just talking about this now, because I would consider doing it, and then I would think, well, this I probably can't do it the right way, and like now my mind is wandering, and I only sat for 2 minutes, and blah, 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 and then I just wouldn't come back to it. So if people are in that boat, everything you're saying is going to help for sure.
And that is where I was for a long time. I can't do this right. I'm not a good meditator. And therefore I'm not even going to keep going with it.
Yeah. And also an interesting idea of these, you said walking meditation. I love to go out and walk. I think like looking at sky and looking at trees is a thing that feels really good for me. So when you say something like that, how does that work? Are you usually listening to something typically?
You can. I know it, put your headphones in and go take a walk and listen to a guided meditation is certainly something that you can do. When I'm out in nature and doing more of a mindful walk, I really like to immerse myself um, in what I'm experiencing. And this is the time when I do something called the five senses meditation.
Mm,
And it really allows you to be present in the moment using all of our senses. So if I'm in the middle of the woods, I'm going for a hike or something, obviously the sense of sight. What am I seeing? What are the different colors of green? Look at, the different shapes of the mountains and the different types of plants and the different trees. Hearing in terms of the animal sounds or the wind or the sound of my feet on the ground, and so on and so forth. And the sense of touch, like what does the wind feel like on my skin? What does the sun feel like? If I brush up against some branches, like noticing that there's no right or wrong. There's no um, particular experience or expectation. It's just noticing what is actually happening in the present moment using all of the senses. So for me, that's a really useful tool to use when I am outside and doing like a walking meditation.
I love that. And that feels very accessible to people. And oftentimes when I'm walking, I'm listening to podcasts. Listeners, you could listen to this podcast. However, I love this idea of experiencing through your different senses, because I can absolutely see how it brings us right into the moment. And now I think because you explained it so well, we understand what would be the point of that. It's really good for our brains, which affects so many things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I love that we now have some practical ideas that we can try. So, do you by any chance have a favorite meditation app that you would recommend, or do you say just kind of try and see? Ah, you're nodding. Okay.
Yeah, yes to both of those. I'm a big fan of Insight Timer. Um, that is one that I have used most consistently. They have a lot of different styles, a lot of different tools. There are um, meditations for sleep and for loving kindness and for movement and for a lot of different styles for anxiety. I think that they also have um, meditations for grief, for
Mm,
children, for beginners. So there's a lot of different styles. I know that there are a lot of different apps out there. They all have some version of different things. So even though that is the one that I use the most, I definitely would encourage people to try different ones, see what works for them. They all usually have like there's a free version, and then the paid
Okay.
version gives you additional things, but try them out.
Yeah, easy enough to start with the free version, see what you think. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so if people are wanting to connect with you, they're curious about some of the work you do with meditation or with some of the other pieces of your life, how will they do that?
Yeah. So Instagram and email and my website, I'm pretty reachable. So just reach out. I have a 10-day mindfulness challenge that's starting in June. This is for beginners or those who have experience and want to kind of reset or maybe kickstart a practice. I find that going into the summer is a really hectic time of year. It's easy to get caught up in all of the flurry and vacations and going to the beach and all of those things. So I find a reset at that time of year to be a really useful way to get into a habit and to commit to staying intentional. I typically have found resets at seasonal changes to be really useful. So doing that in June. I also do private or group sessions. I do corporate meditation courses. Have a few online courses that are self-paced if someone wants to just learn on their own timeline. And I also co-host retreats twice a year. The next one is going to be in the fall in October here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's going to be focused on movement and mindfulness and intention. And we have some really exciting programming set up for that one. I'm really excited about it.
Fall in the Blue Ridge Mountains. That sounds quite nice.
October in Asheville, you can't get any better than that.
I'm sure that's true. Goodness. So people can find all of these details on your website. Is that accurate? Sayhellocollective.com. Yes?
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
Excellent. And I know you're the Traveling Mind on Instagram, and I will put all of that in the show notes so that people can just click and have a look.
Amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know what you mean about June. And I used to be a teacher. And so June was a crazy time because we were still in
Oh, yeah.
school part of the month and all the end of school things. And then, of course, I have raised kids and they were doing all the things. And so it's kind of a transition period where you don't always know exactly what to expect.
Exactly. And those transition periods require a little bit more intention so that you don't get caught up in the wave.
That sounds very smart. Okay, well then my last question, and this is one that I do ask everyone because we are creating a Spotify playlist. And
Love
during it's fun. During the first year of this podcast, it was a good mood playlist. Now, during the second year of this podcast, it is a nostalgia playlist. So
that.
tell me if you're thinking of a song that you like to listen to that brings back good memories, feels very nostalgic, what would that be?
For me, it has to be I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston. I
Ooh,
have been a fan of hers since I was like, I don't know, 8 years old. Um, One of our best talents ever. The song it's joyful, it's fun. I remember with my girlfriends when I was younger, it coming on the radio and us dancing and just having a blast and feeling free and fun. And it's one of my favorite songs of all time.
I absolutely love that song, and I can kind of feel it and hear it as you're talking about that. So I love it. And I make these playlists for the listeners, but also for me. Honestly, I want to hear about these songs. So
Such a great idea. Yes.
perfect. Okay. And I'll put links to that in the show notes as well. So Angela, thank you so much. This has been personally really interesting for me, and I know that listeners are going to benefit from your explanation and your ideas. So thank you for
Thank you so
joining
much.
me.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.